Okay, I'd like to call the meeting of the Strategic Initiatives Committee to order. All members are present. There's one item on the agenda today, which is consider the RFP for the available space in the Village Center lower level. Rebecca, do you want to present on this?
Sure. Attached is a draft that encompasses some of the thoughts that were expressed at the last meeting for strategic initiatives, where we briefly discussed the possibility of leasing the space in the lower level of Village Center. It's relatively short in scope and in request. If you'll recall, we were going to put this out to not only institutions already established here in the village, such as the Senior Resource Center, school district, but also others within the community to see who has expressed interest. But if there's additional parameters or guidance that the board would like to include within the RFP, I'm happy to take those comments and do so at this time.
Is there any discussion or questions from the members? I've looked at it. It looks like a pretty standard RFP to me.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to make a motion.
Right.
So I move to recommend the village board approval of the RFP document for available space in Village Center lower level.
I'll second.
Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. That's the only item on the agenda. There's no additional questions or comments from anyone watching either at home or in person. Probably should have done that.
I can move to adjourn.
Without that, I'll make a motion.
Move to adjourn. Again. Yes.
Second.
Great. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Meeting's adjourned.
Great. So we've got 2 minutes until we're agendaed for the All right, good evening, everybody. We are convening for Public Works. It is 7:16. Tonight we have one agenda item. All trustees are accounted for. Tonight's item is to consider approval of contractor for Atwater Park, the Bluff section of the park, native vegetation restoration management for slope stability request. We have Leanne Butchlick, Director of Public Works, here to. Nope, I'm wrong with that. Oh, I'm sorry. What is, or why did I? Oh, we moved it to the full board. My bad. I'm sorry. It came in my agenda listing. It came after. Can we end recording and start over? I'm just kidding.
No editing.
That's not the public record.
All right. So the actual agenda item we have this evening is the 2025 Capitol Drive Pedestrian Improvements Initiative to consider draft pavement marking policy. This is the 8th meeting of such. We do have Leanne Butchlick, Director of Public Works, here to present on this item. Take her away, Leanne.
Thank you. At your last meeting, there was some general discussion about process for moving forward. But prior to that, it was suggested that staff could prepare some additional, cost analyses that would show some extended timeframes for maintenance. The initial policy, draft policy discussion direction included paint marking maintenance every other year, epoxy maintenance on Capitol Drive every 3 years, and on all other arterials, epoxy maintenance every 5 years. And it was suggested by the committee that they would be interested in seeing what those cost projections looked like if the epoxy markings on Capitol were moved to every 5 years and the other arterials moved to every 7. So that is the only real addition to your packet. That is the the spreadsheet that is marked estimated marking costs, paint every other year, epoxy 5/7.
Thank you. Trustees, so do you have any questions for Director Butchlick?
No, I appreciate this. It's very helpful.
Any thoughts moving forward on this? Whether we want to, take a look at option A. I mean, my preference would be option A. I don't think Capitol Drive and our main sort of areas can go 7 years without being repainted or epoxied. But would love to know your thoughts on this 5 years. 5 years to me is still kind of too long, but understanding our budget sort of constraints and how expensive this is, your thoughts on 5 versus 7 years.
I mean, I would sort of lean towards the longer one, 7 years. Epoxy seems to last a long time, and I think as long as we think it's safe, staff thinks it's safe, that I haven't really seen any data one way or the other that shows that either one is particularly effective. So just given all the expenses that we have, all these new budget items, I would lean towards the alternative B.
But it all comes down to me. Frankly, I'm more comfortable with A. I mean, at this point, the lifespan of these products seem to vary to some extent. And so I would rather budget for replacement earlier, knowing that there's probably a decent chance it's going to happen one way or the other. Like, it would be fantastic if it would last 7 years and we didn't have to worry about it. But I also think that there's a high probability we're before the 5-year mark anyway. So my preference would be A, because I think it's a little bit more like of where we're going within 5.
Leanne, based on Trustee Kudo's comments, do you see us addressing this earlier if we do go with the 5-year or the 7-year? Can you remind me where we're at right now in year-wise with what the current epoxy on Capitol?
Yep. So the crosswalks and stop bars were marked in epoxy on Capitol Drive in the summer of 2022. If I recall correctly, the request to remark them came less than a year later. Part of the intent of those markings is to designate the crossing area. Primarily that is for pedestrians, but it certainly helps alert drivers to the presence of pedestrians and the use of the street by other transportation forms. And many communities, Short included, have used enhanced crosswalk markings to attempt to provide a better message to motorists. A pedestrian in a crosswalk isn't necessarily safer if the crosswalk marking is brand new versus a couple years old. It's the message that it sends to the motorist, right? It's perception. The markings currently, though, during the daytime, they do appear to be faded. If you look at their retroreflectivity at night, that does still appear to be in, we'll call it, good working order. And some could make the arguments that perhaps that's the more important time of day. So in large part, it's a community-based priority or assignment of importance. I think if we go back to your last discussion, there was some discussion about the funding implications and whether in fact we want to marry ourselves to a policy or continue that this be a guideline. And I think Trustee Stokebrand, who obviously isn't here this evening, but may have used that phrasing as the current guidelines. And I just want to clarify that there's no written guidelines for this. What I would equate guidelines to is just simply past practice. This is how we've done it for the last 2 decades. Doesn't make it right, doesn't make it wrong. It just makes it consistent.
And
Okay.
your point is creating a policy around this would really just help the department kind of plan.
That was my initial thought, that it would help us plan in terms of work planning for calendars, but also for budget planning. But, as we've dove deeper into this, it's very clear that the fiscal implications are significant. And a policy may remove some of the flexibility in future budget discussions.
So I don't know if you were here at that meeting, Eric, but we did have the discussion about keeping this sort of the guidelines in place versus actually sort of moving forward with the policy. And that's a real sort of topic. And I think it could be like a reality for this, just to kind of keep it the way we've been going about it with, I think, a structure like we've planned out here in place. We would still just keep them as guidelines and not sort of ratify a policy around this. So that was a big sort of conversation we had, and it does make a little bit of sense, at least to me. So
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a problem. If we don't need a policy, we think that there's a decent chance we wouldn't be able to follow it anyways, given the lifespan of the product. And what's the point of making it?
yeah,
Let's stick with what we know has been working. And then we replace them. It's the responsibility of DPW, but let's replace them when they need to be replaced.
Yeah.
No, I wholeheartedly agree.
and I think we've set a sort of a framework maybe for how you can approach a budget, or sort of the higher level philosophy that we've been kind of talking about in these past meetings, with how we'd like to see the markings and paint every other year, and maybe the 5-year span. We can still move forward with that. I don't necessarily think we need the policy for it, but I think we can move forward with that as like a blueprint, and then we can kind of work around that. Does that make sense?
Yes. If I have a moment, I would just appreciate a moment of conversation. So that's the only, as this committee has worked through it, that is the only outstanding item from the 2023 taper request that has yet to be addressed or responded. So I just want to make sure that if I communicate back to the original petitioners, that the board reviewed the request and determined that the village would continue to follow past marking practices, which is periodic marking, and that would be a future schedule, but would not be imminent. Would that response capture?
I mean, remarked it as determined. The board still over DPW.
And, we all value, I think I went into this saying that, I want to see capital remarked every year. I think it's a really important thing as far as visibility goes for the community, for public safety. I do value that fresh paint. I know it doesn't stop a car from hitting somebody, but it does. It's very symbolic. And I think that that symbolism of having fresh paint and it being very clear and bright is very helpful for a community, especially when you've got the whole village crossing that street in the morning. And I think it's very important that that visibility is there. So I think that's where I came down on all of this. But looking at the budget implications, it's extremely, extremely expensive. And we're a village in a situation where we've got a lot of very expensive needs coming up all at once. And how do you prioritize those? So I think we set a good sort of blueprint. And, I think that, if for you to go back to the taper sort of request, I think that, I think you have the information, and if you can pass my name and include my name into that, and I can have a conversation if necessary and kind of go down that path. Prism McKay.
Coming up to time, but I might just add, for the record, the collective memory of the group is that also, I mean, it's not only a budget consideration, there is a lack of data to indicate that remarking every year, A, would change the outcomes, or B, that there's been an extensive, thanks, extensive data-driven review that involves student input, since really the people who use that intersection are largely students and people that live in the apartments most proximal to that area. And so there is not a huge request. There's not data of crashes to support. It's also a very heavily controlled intersection at the highest use parts of the day between, there's always the controlled signals, and now we have auditory ones. In addition, at the school times, there are paid crossing guards. So given all of those parameters, it's not like markings are the only thing that's attempting to control that intersection for pedestrians. So I would just say I think this is a reasonable decision and direction to go, given all of those things.
With all this said, though, I will continue to be interested, and I know Trustee McGovern has brought this up in the past, on efforts that we can undertake to continue traffic calming on that street. So whether it's the new additions of the bump outs or other things down the road, and maybe with those more permanent traffic calming measures somewhere down the road, that will alleviate some of the concerns that folks have in the community about.
Yeah.
If generally speaking, that road is just slower.
Yep.
I did receive a response today from WISDOT, and that's not an agenda item for our request related to the bump outs, so.
Wait, that's, sorry, can you repeat that?
I did receive
We are
a
not
response
agenda-
from
Oh, sorry.
WISDOT
Yep.
today on our request to continue to review curb extensions, and
Is positive?
it was favorable.
Oh, fantastic. That's great.
There we
But
go.
I had about 35 seconds to spend on that today, so
Well,
more on
hearing
that
about it
later.
soon. Okay.
Thank you for your 35 seconds.
I think as much as we can do to exhaust these conversations about what we can do about, public safety, because, in the long run, we're dealing with kids, school age kids, and, between our children, our seniors, those are people that we have to look out for the most. So I think from the Public Works Committee perspective, we're going to have every conversation, exhaust that conversation, to what degree we need to make sure that we're doing everything right for the community. If that's talking about repainting every year, creating raised crosswalks, whatever we can do, we're going to have those conversations, and what makes the most sense and what we can actually do is I think what we're going to do, because I think this board has always seen that public safety is critical, and we're willing to go above and beyond. So, so with that said, do you need a motion? You don't need a motion. All right. Well, thank you very much. Do we have a?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All right, we are adjourned at 7:32. Thank you.
Excellent. I'm going to let the village clerk get positioned, and then we will All right, I'd like to call the meeting of the village board to order at 7:35. All trustees are present except for trustee Stokebrand and trustee Arndorfer, who are both excused this evening. Has this meeting been publicly noticed?
The meeting has been properly noticed and posted according to law.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here this evening, and thank you for your time, talent, and patience in advance as we conduct business this evening. We have two special orders of business this evening, and it includes the swearing in of newly elected trustees Kudo and for reelected to a second term, and trustee Warren actually kind of reelected to a second term with a hiatus in between. So it's my pleasure at this time to announce that ceremony, and I will hand it over to Clerk Harrell.
Yes, ma'am. I think we have to.
Right.
Gentlemen, please raise your hand. Repeat after me. I state your name,
I, Rustin Moore,
having been elected
having been elected
to the office of village trustee
office of village trustee
in the village of Shorewood,
in the village of Shorewood,
swear that I will support
swear that I will support
the Constitution
the Constitution
of the United States
of the United States,
and the Constitution
Constitution
of the state of Wisconsin,
of the state of Wisconsin,
will faithfully
faithfully
and impartially
and faithfully
discharge the duties
discharge the duties
of said office,
and office
best of my ability,
ability,
so help me God.
so help me God.
I think, where are you?
Oh.
Good to have that one. Where are those from? You want me to take?
Oh, you want me to move this back?
Just right here.
I am.
I thought somebody was. Over there.
Oh, you did.
All right, thank you very much. Good night. All right, moving on to 4B, review of DPW site analysis by Strand. We are not going to have you take an oath or anything like that. You can just come to the podium. But it's no less significant. We've been waiting for this review for quite some time. So there's no action required this evening. This is just a presentation and the board can ask technical questions, but otherwise the information will be part of future decision-making.
Okay, I think everybody ready?
Mhm.
Thank you for having me here tonight to go over the DPW site assessment. Feel free if you want to interrupt during the presentation with questions while they're hot on your mind. Feel free to do that or hold them till the end. So next slide. One more, Rebecca.
Next slide.
So topics to be covered, first, just kind of go through general site conditions, the retaining wall evaluation, environmental review, stormwater management, existing site utilities, and opinion of probable cost summary. So general site conditions on the right-hand side, when it comes back up. Just aerial photo of the DPW site. It's within that red box is the site. So it consists of 4 parcels, approximately 3.3 acres. The entire site is pretty much paved. There's some small areas of pervious area, but for the most part, it's paved. There are known impacted soils, which I'll get into on subsequent slides. And then there was a Alta survey completed for the site, which identifies like the exact property boundaries and lists encroachments. An encroachment would be some improvement that crosses the property line, whether it's part of the DPW site has a fence that goes over the property line, or property adjacent to the site has garage or fence or something. That's what an encroachment would be. So there were 21 encroachments. Most of them are just less than a foot. And then there are some little bit larger ones, mainly the DPW fence is actually on Milwaukee County property by the bike trail, kind of near the old railroad building. The warehouse building is what it's called now. And then there are 4 existing easements for the site. The most relevant one at this time is We Energies has an access easement to the site. So they have access through all 4 parcels from the entrance on Morris to the north to a substation. The substation is just off the map, but they have a big electrical substation there. So they have an access easement through this site.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, please.
And you know, this is my first DPW meeting, so excuse me if this is something that's already been covered, but I'm wondering, are we aiming to clean up those encroachments as part of this project, or do the encroachments just continue forward as we decide what to do with this site?
A lot of it'll depend on what happens to the site. I think if if the site gets redeveloped and the retaining wall gets reconstructed, I think you'd clean them all up at that point on that side of the site.
I mean, sorry, clarify, going both ways or just going?
I would think if you could both ways.
Okay.
Some of them are going to be hard to clean up if the site stays as is. Like for instance, the upper garage, that's kind of that like black rectangle kind of in the middle of the site. That actually is on private property by about 6 inches. So the building itself is. So some will be difficult. Others would just be a matter of, you know, moving things over a foot or two.
Okay. Thank you.
So back
Also-
to the easements. There is on the north side of the site, it's hard to see, but there's a 15-foot egress easement. That was for when the annex building was actually a residential property. It gave that property owner the right to access their building. So that one could actually be removed from the books if you wanted to go through that paperwork process, but it's no longer really a relevant easement. So if the site was sold, there wouldn't be any real concern from someone purchasing the site. Then there,
Top left. What's up?
top right.
Top right, I mean, sorry.
Yeah.
Top right.
Yep. There's a small railroad track easement on the top left, just a little tiny wedge there. Again, that's probably not real impactful for somebody purchasing the property. And then the last one is just a conservation easement. So the village installed some large cisterns, and that has a 10-year window on it, and that will actually expire, I believe, either this year or next year. So that easement wouldn't be something that would be carried on in the future.
Can I ask just a quick question about the northern edge of the property on Pinedale Court? There's the road that leads to substation. Is that Village Road? Is that Energies?
I mean, I don't have a good picture of where the right of way is here. Part of it is, well, I think the whole cul-de-sac and everything would be village property. I don't know, Leanne, if you know for sure off the top of your head. Okay.
So it's more than likely a We Energies access road.
They can access the site there, and we had a meeting with them and we discussed, if the Pinedale area, if that was improved, because they said they can't get one of their larger crane trucks back there if they need to replace some of the larger equipment at their substation. They said they go through the DPW site and those trucks aren't able to access through Pinedale.
Okay.
But we have asked them, part of the follow-up, the reason the report's still draft is we've asked them for information on their trucks size to just see what could be done to maybe give them access specifically from Pinedale and eliminate this easement. They didn't seem real willing to eliminate the easement, but we've asked the question at this
Okay.
point. And
I mean, I guess I'm just asking, depending on what we end up doing with these, to knowing who owns that little strip of driveway or road that comes out of Pinedale Court.
yeah,
Would be helpful to see if we have northern access to that site or if it's just that access right.
So to be clear, that was determining that was outside the scope of this analysis, correct?
yeah, and
Okay.
I mean, you'd have to go through the We
Yeah.
Energies site to get to
Okay.
the north side of this site. That
Okay.
I know for sure. I'm just not sure how far the right of way of Pinedale extends.
Okay,
Got
thank
it.
you.
Thank you.
Retaining wall evaluation. So for those of you not familiar, there is a retaining wall on the east side of the site. So where those kind of green, like dashed dotted lines are, the wall is located there. It's actually within a couple feet of the main DPW building. It varies in height, typically 6, 7 feet high, lower in some spots. So the total length of the wall, well, the length, yeah, it's 1,500 feet or so, and then there's an additional 500 feet along the upper garage. Or the wall, sorry, the wall itself is 500 feet long, and then the upper garage also serves as a retaining wall. So the upper garage is the building in the middle of the site, and it's a 2-story building. So the east wall is essentially a retaining wall. And then the other challenging aspect of it is We Energies has overhead utility lines that are adjacent to the wall, like right next to it in a number of spots. There's poles. And then also on those lines are Time Warner and AT&T have utilities. And that power serves customers to the south too. It just doesn't serve the DPW site and the residents adjacent to the site. Next slide. Oh, where that came from. All right, retaining wall evaluation. So here's just to give you an idea of what the retaining wall looks like. The first photos on the upper left. So that's right as you enter the DPW site. The main building is on the left, and then that's the retaining wall on the right. And you can see that there's been a fence added on top of the wall that's also serving as a retaining wall, which I'm sure the wall wasn't designed to have a fence on top to serve as additional retaining. And you can see where the posts are embedded in the concrete spalled out in some areas. The next photos down in the middle, you can see the utility pole next to the wall. And there's just more photos of the wall itself and the posts. And then the photos on the very bottom, that's more as you go north on the site. So there's the bottom right one is actually, there's a garage there. And the garage has like a deck almost on the back, you could call it. And that's what those 2 posts are holding it up. And that's actually on their property. So that's not an encroachment of that garage onto the DPW property. So it's just on the left, the various issues, deteriorating concrete, as you can see. The fences are installed on the wall, acting as retaining walls, which would not be the intended design. There's several garages located within 5 feet of the retaining wall. So making replacement of the wall quite challenging. The utility poles, then the wall is made of multiple different materials. The ownership of the wall is something that back in the late 90s, this isn't a new issue. This has been ongoing since at least the 90s. At that time, the village had determined, or is their opinion, that the ownership of the wall was actually the property owners. So that was the opinion back then. I guess we haven't asked Nathan to weigh in on the opinion of the ownership of the wall now, but regardless, the wall is in poor shape and it's going to be a combined effort. I mean, there's really no way to replace the wall without engaging property owners for access and those sorts of things.
So
Are
just-
those property owners all, or they're responsible for the wall?
I'm unsure of that. If they've lived there 20 years, they might be. If they're newer, they probably aren't. I don't think there's been any recent outreach about it.
I'm not really sure how to ask this. Do we know if any of the property owners have made improvements, made change, since it's their wall technically from the 90s?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that looks like nothing there looks recent.
Okay.
It all looks like it's probably been like that for 10 or 15 years.
Yeah, that was getting to the root of my
Yeah.
recent improvements.
Next slide. So we did look at options to replace the wall. So we did engage a local contractor who specializes in these sorts of kind of difficult construction techniques and retaining walls, and they walked the site with us and kind of talked through their ideas. So the types of retaining walls that were considered, just reinforced concrete. So that'd just be concrete wall essentially. Reinforced concrete foundation wall with concrete block above the foundation wall. So you have concrete below grade and then you build it up with block above grade. Sheet piling with some sort of facade. So sheet piling would be like what you see along Lake Michigan where they pound the sheeting in the harbor area. And then H pile with lagging is kind of just like it sounds. The beams are an H shape, and then they put wood or precast concrete or something between the H part of the piles as the wall. So those were the different types of wall construction methods evaluated. And then on the right in the photo is what we assumed for our cost is the most cost effective for the various areas. So behind the main building, we were looking at the reinforced concrete with the concrete block on top because you can't easily get heavy equipment in there to pound H piles. The H piles are basically long, very long steel piles that they pound in with a hammer. So with the overhead utility lines and whatnot, it wasn't feasible to do that in that area. Between the main building and the main garage, we have H pile with lagging. So that would be offset into the village property is what we were assuming there so that there's more room to construct it. And that would be the driven piles with large equipment. So that would be fairly cost effective to complete that area. The upper garage would remain as the retaining wall that's in good condition. And then the last section to the north of the upper garage would be the H pile with lagging again, offset into the village's property. We wouldn't go the other way into the homeowner's property just because of all the garages and everything. There's no room for it. So then the existing wall would remain, and then you would fill in that annular, the space or the void between the new wall and the existing wall with some sort of material. That's what we assume for the cost. Obviously, this is kind of a high level report, just looking at ballpark, what it would cost. And this is assuming that the existing site stays. So if this site if the DPW site moves and this becomes some other sort of development, then there's a whole different set of options with those buildings removed. So I think I cover everything on the left. So the new retaining wall, assume it would be shifted west, and that would be in all cases. Access to adjacent property for tiebacks. Yeah, so there would have to be agreements with property owners to have the way these walls would work, especially the concrete block wall, is the wall would be here, and then there'd be like buried reinforcement on the other side of the wall that holds the wall from tipping. So the weight of the soil on top of that reinforcement pulls the wall kind of towards the property so it doesn't tip. So there'd have to be excavation and installation of the tiebacks on the adjacent properties. And then there'd be earth retention for the garages too. Some of them are just so close that you wouldn't be able to dig by them without undermining them.
So before we get off the retaining wall piece, I just wanted to kind of focus on one more question. Homeowners. So we have 500 contiguous feet of retaining wall. We have an opinion that the homeowners own that wall. So I'm assuming that every homeowner would then have to give us permission to tear down the wall that they technically own. So I'm wondering, and again, this is my first meeting as a trustee. I'm just wondering if there's been any outreach or kind of proactive communication to those homeowners. We're going to be making requests of them to agree to some of these changes to the.
I mean, there was back in the 90s. I'm not aware of any more recently. This is just kind of developing, I guess you could
Okay.
say.
Yeah, no, I wasn't. Yeah.
And it was,
This area.
Okay, I just wanted
And
to
it-
figure out where we are. So.
Yeah, and it wasn't part of the site, the scope for site analysis to
Okay.
engage those parties.
Got it.
Good question.
And then the overhead utility lines we assumed remained in place. And I think the next slide I talk about, yeah, the costs. So retaining wall replacement costs, like I said, we talked to one contractor about this, and that's where numbers are coming from. We assume the We Energy lines remain in place, but sections are de-energized for the work. So We Energies did say that they could take out certain sections of the lines so that we could use some overhead equipment, because the regulation is you cannot be within 10 feet of the energized power lines. You can be close to the telephone lines or fiber optic or whatever, but the energized electric lines, you have to be 10 feet away. So it would make driving piles in that area impossible if they're not de-energized. So this assumed they're de-energized, and it's at cost, We Energy's cost of $500,000, the second last line in the table. And then we did ask We Energies for costs we actually asked them for costs to bury the lines, so they wouldn't be overhead anymore. And they said they wouldn't be able to do that for a number of reasons. I won't get into all of them here. And they provided a cost of 2.7 million to partially relocate them. So those lines we mentioned earlier, they serve properties to the south. So all they essentially would be doing with this option is taking the power that goes to the property owners to the south and routing it through Morris and around the DPW site. And then the DPW site and the property owners would still have overhead lines in the same location. So it doesn't really help us a lot. It helps a little bit because it's easier to take them out of service, but in the long run, it's not as helpful. So that's why we went with the temporarily de-energizing option.
I got a question. So the retaining wall estimate, that's for if we kept it as a DPW site,
Correct.
and would you expect it to be really different if it was another use like residential or some new development there?
Yeah, I would expect it would go down because you'd
Okay.
have a lot better access.
I see. Okay.
So I would think it would be cheaper. Yeah, I didn't really go through the costs in the table. So the retaining wall itself, the total capital cost, about 550,000. The earth retention system for the garages, we had 100,000 in there. And then we figured there'd have to be easements. Maybe that's something that could be negotiated with the property owners, but we put dollar amount in there for easements and private property restoration, and then contingencies on top of that. So we had total cost of about 1.6 million for the retaining wall. Environmental review. So the site does have soil impacts and groundwater contamination from petroleum. That's the blue circles and that other dashed or hatched area. So a cap is required over those impacted areas if they're not removed. So right now the cap is the DPW pavement. If there's excavating, DNR has to be notified. That's part of the conditions of the closure. If there's excavating, additional testing should be completed. The soils are suitable for landfill disposal, at least the known impacts right now. So that's not something that's going to scare off developers usually. If they were hazardous and had to go out of state or something, that would be a different story, but these can be landfilled based on what we know now. So if all the impacted soils were landfilled, all the at least known impacted soils in the areas that would be disturbed, that cost would be about $700,000. And they don't have to move them necessarily. It's if you're digging in those areas.
For
Yep.
me, this looks like. Right?
Yeah.
This is, I expected the whole site to be, this graphic shows us spots that are shaded.
Yeah, and there was some other testing completed on the site when they did this testing, and those areas were found to be clean. So that's,
That is good.
Are there portions of the site that I mean, because it says complete additional testing of excavated soil. Are there other parts of this site where there could potentially be contamination, or do you feel like you have a
There
pretty good
are.
cross?
I mean, they collected samples in, various spots and those were clean outside of these blue areas, but that doesn't mean that there wasn't something in a different area that wasn't sampled. So you never know until you start digging.
Are you pretty confident that we're not talking about another large area like this?
I would say I'm pretty confident that whatever they found could be landfilled.
Okay.
And unless they're digging really deep here, then hopefully they could stage development to avoid digging in the areas where there's known impacts or minimize it at least.
I only ask because of the grade of the site. Where this is would be a part of the lower grade.
Yeah,
of
it's the
that
lower
site.
area.
So if you went farther north and you went deeper because you were excavating the site to try a little bit flatter, I just less surprises.
Yeah.
We probably didn't go down 15 feet.
I can't remember how deep the borings were, but yeah, they probably didn't go 15, probably went.
Or whatever the difference in grade would,
Mm-hmm.
elevation difference. Okay.
Then you'd have another retaining wall on the north side of the site.
Right. Stop.
That retaining wall's a topic for a few minutes from now.
There
No,
is
our-
one other spot too where they couldn't test because there's an existing building there.
Mhm.
So that DNR specifically said that area needs to be tested if that building's removed.
Mhm.
Is that what used to be the incinerator? And
Yeah,
test?
yeah, it's
Mhm.
right in that area. Yep.
And we would have to test that if that was renovated, demolished.
Yeah, if the building itself is moved, yeah, you
But if the
That's right.
building kept in place,
can't.
do a lot of.
Yeah, you can't do it. But you wouldn't have to do anything with it.
Right.
Okay, next slide. Stormwater management. So as a redevelopment site, this triggers both MMSD and in Wisconsin DNR requirements. MMSD's requirements is 10% reduction to the existing runoff release rate. So it's basically trying to mitigate pushing more water into the river quicker than you normally would have. And then DNR's is more of a water quality standard with total suspended solids reduction. Example, stormwater management would be like a wet pond, underground storage basin, bioretention basin. And the stormwater management size is going to largely depend on what the development or redevelopment looks like, how much impervious area there is, will drive it. And even depending on the amount of impervious area, that MMSD requirement may go away if there's enough pervious area. So the stormwater management for the site isn't particularly difficult to achieve, I would say. Next slide. Site utilities. So there's existing sanitary sewer, which would probably be rerouted if there's a new development. There is MMSD does have, or there's capacity available for the new sanitary sewer. The storm sewer is that yellow line that goes out to the river. So that's a 30-inch outfall to the Milwaukee River. So that's good. There's stormwater connection right on the site. And then water main comes in both from the north and from Morris. And the one from the north is a new 6-inch water main. It was installed in 2015. So there's water connections available too. Privately owned utilities, again, these would probably all be rerouted and whatnot with development, but there is natural gas, electric, telephone cable. So opinion of probable cost for just the big ticket items for the site. So demolition, removing all the buildings, we have at approximately 430,000. The retaining wall, talked about earlier, about 1.6 million, environmental, about 700,000. And then the stormwater management, 75 to 100,000. So just summary, the general site conditions, the biggest things were kind of the easements and the encroachments, the retaining wall, I guess repairs isn't necessarily the right word, but reconstruction, environmental review, we had the impacted soils would have to be managed. And then stormwater management, the MMSD and WDNR requirements. And I think the site utilities are pretty straightforward. Any additional questions?
If we found additional, and again, I'm just sort of looking at the environmental cost of the 700K. That's sort of the basement where based on where you've tested to landfill that, to haul that out in landfill would be about 700K.
Yeah, and just to be clear, that's actually going down. I think it was like 7 or 8 feet.
Okay,
Basically chase all the impacted soils and clean the entire thing up.
okay,
Which wouldn't have to be done if they weren't putting in like a lower level parking garage there or something. You know, it would,
you
if
could
they were
cap
just
it.
putting pavement over it, they would maybe have to move a little bit for a storm sewer or water main or something, but they wouldn't have to remove any more than they need to for the work.
Okay,
So I'm just going to say for the purposes of time and also practicality, technical questions, definitely of the engineer, but any kind of speculation about the site and its use and things like that, we would save for a future agenda item.
No, I just want to say thank you. This is really great information. It's something that, I've been following now for years and, we've been really looking forward to seeing a lot of this data. So this is fantastic. I really appreciate this kind of next step in the process.
Thank you.
Yeah, outstanding.
Thanks.
I've sat through a number of site analysis reports of this site, and this is the first one that I feel really confident about that we could move forward with. So. All right, moving on to consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
I'll second.
Motion by trustee Ursink, seconded by trustee Warren. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Public hearings, we don't have any this evening. Citizens to be heard. This item is for matters not on the agenda. Are there any citizens who would like to be heard this evening? Don't think we have. We only have one citizen in the gallery tonight. Moving on to item 9, new business. 9A, consider July 4th parade route. This comes to us from the Community and Business Relations. If you'll recall, there was an alternate route chosen last year. That was brought back for consideration and recommendation to the Community and Business Relations. There was a direction to send it back to committee to explore additional investments that would allow the 2023 parade route, kind of the traditional parade route, to take place this year. So this is coming to us from committee with a recommendation, not with a recommendation.
Correct. Just for additional conversation. Unfortunately, at the last meeting, I didn't have it agendized for action with a recommendation.
Oh,
So it was determined at that point to bring it forward for full discussion by the village board.
okay. So the purpose for this evening is to give staff direction on this. So what I'm going to ask is I'm going to ensure, or I'm assuming that everyone present, all the trustees have read all the information and the history of this discussion. This is coming to us with a recommendation from staff to either shorten the parade route or to do the 2024 parade route, or make all the investments for additional security and barricades and whatnot that are recommended to the tune of $40,000 or something like that. Correct?
That's right, which is reflective of the best practices that were provided by the
Exactly,
police department.
that are safety based. So with that, I would open it up to the floor for either questions, discussion, or a motion at this time. Trustee Ursink.
As somebody that's walked in this parade for probably the last 6-7 years, the traditional route is something that I personally hold dear. I know it's not ideal. It's a long span and it crosses capital, which is very problematic. I do think that, to make sure that we are crossing the whole village is very important, that everybody is involved and everybody has sort of a seat on the street, in the community, that we're not sort of taken away from anybody, there. And then to end at River Park is just, it's always been such a joyous time. And I'm not quite sure we can replicate that anywhere else. So I think at the beginning of these conversations, I was, I agreed with a lot of trustees. I was very adamant that we'd like to see this continue. But after further conversations with committee members and, especially, our chief of police, I am very much sort of on the fence on this one. I think there's a high cost to pull this off. I think in the long run, we can do it at least one more year, but at the same time, it's expensive. It's stressful for our different sort of organizations with DPW, with the police department. And I struggle with, is it worth it? Is it worth the extra stress and the extra pressure? So, to be quite honest, I'm on the fence. I'm leaning one way, but I sympathize with sort of our different departments that have to put in that hard work that day, their safety measures and their the thoughtfulness they're putting into making sure that this is a safe activity for the community. So I'm very conflicted with this one. I would love to see it go for one more year, because I know next year is not going to be a possibility with Oakland being out of commission. But at the same time, it does add so much extra stress to our departments, and I can hear them loud and clear. So again, I'm on the fence, and I'd love to hear what everybody else has to think about this.
Trustee Warren.
And I'm happy to go next. I agree with Trustee Ursink on, I generally prefer the longer parade route. It's tradition. It's inclusive of the entire village. It's really nice to go from one end of the village to the other. All that said, in this economic climate, it's hard to argue for the additional $40,000. I think you need to look at safety as the paramount issue here. It also has the benefit of efficiency if we do the shorter parade route. So, my lean on this one is to shorten the parade route, given the additional expenditure that will be required of the long parade route. Again, I do love the fact that the long parade route includes the whole village. We do have the celebration at Atwater. I think that's nice as well. So my inkling here is to vote for the shorter parade route.
Shall we go around?
Sure, I'll go next. I'm going to vote the same way for the shorter parade route. I walked it last year. I felt like it was fine. I had a great time anyway. It seemed like the community enjoyed it. And I'll just add, early in my career, I was a litigator where we represented a lot of state and local governments, and you would just not believe how dangerous parades are. Like people fall off floats, people get run over, there's people drink too much, and you have this added thing now where you've got mass shootings, these mass casualty events. And I just think we got to be smart about this and defer to our, the judgment of our police and DPW staff and just go with the shorter route. So that's how I'm going to vote.
Trustee Kudo?
Yep. I'm on the opposite side. So this was in committee. We discussed it a lot. We had a lot of back and forth. Very thankful for the police department and DPW to come in and sort of walk us through in detail the concerns that they had about the route, about the signage, the safety. I think that there are times where, and this might be a little bit to Trustee Ursink's point, where we're just sort of called upon to do difficult things, right? Is it easy to pull off the parade in the 4th of July on the same day? No, it's not. I'm sure it's not. And now I know that it's not, based on the conversations we've had with staff. But we don't always have to do the easier thing. Sometimes we should do the hard thing. It is a tradition in this village to have a parade that goes from one end of the village to the other, from what would be, frankly, the village with a little bit more wealth on the north end of the village than on the south end of the village, right? And we talk a lot about being inclusive and equity and, I wonder if we would be so quick to change this route if we went from the south end of the village to Capitol Drive and then just ended it in the parking lot over here and cut off the entire northern end of the village. You know, would we be so willing to have that conversation such that the entire north half of the village would be excluded from this process? And I don't think that we would, you know, and so yes, $40,000 is quite a bit of money. But there are certain things that make Shorewood who we are and things that we do that make this place a special place. And I think that the parade is one of those things. There are other activities, the Criterium, that's all the northern end of the village. Shorewood Shenanigans, all of the events that happen in this village happen on the north end of this village. The one thing that we take to the southern end of this village is this parade. For all the folks that live down there, all the folks that live in affordable housing, all those units, they get cut off and they don't get to participate in it. And I think that's a travesty. And I think that we can talk a lot about being inclusive and being all these things. And sometimes to do that, it's difficult. And sometimes to do that, you have to be outside of your comfort zone. You have to stretch a little bit to make those things happen. And I think this is one of those opportunities where we can stretch a little bit, where we can be stressed a little bit, we can make that happen because we have for the last however many decades. So I understand the concern about safety. I think it's a tremendous concern. I understand where the chief and the department are coming from. I don't think that there's a situation where we could make this 100% safe. It's just the reality of the world that we live in. We're in a dense urban area. There are a lot of opportunities for, ingress and egress and all these side streets. It's at some point you just sort of have to, you have to take the risk of something happening. Litigious society, certainly, anything could happen there. But I think that, for $40,000 to not cut off an entire half of this village from an event that they've been participating in for decades, frankly, is inappropriate. And so for that reason, I will be voting to continue the parade on the north end of the village and the south end of the village to make sure that everyone in this village gets to participate. And I will work diligently to find the $40,000 to offset these costs because I believe it's worth it. Thank you.
Question for staff, where would this be funded from? To do a best practice parade?
We don't have funding allocated within this current year budget.
Right, so are there reserves that can be tapped or?
We don't have dollar amounts like this in the amount of $40,000 to allocate.
Okay, thank you. So that's part of okay, so thank you. So if there is a motion to proceed with best practice recommendations for the parade route of 2023, then the motion would need to be moved, including how it would be funded, because we don't typically take motions that are unfunded, or we don't create those situations. So that is an issue tonight so I would take a motion to defer if somebody wants to figure out that plan. I'm inspired by your comments, Trustee Kudo. And at the same time, there is someone who still complains that the parade no longer goes down Morris in front of their house. She tells me that every time I see her. And there are people that tell me they wish that it did go down in front of their house rather than on Oakland, because nobody lives on Oakland, So there are these other perspectives that are, less well known. So the only way that we could go forward with this parade route, the longer parade route all the way down Oakland, is with all of those safety mechanisms. You know, we had, there's just no way that I'm not gonna, that I'm gonna disregard safety recommendations or best practices. Also, I know that over the 10 years that I've been participating in the parade, as an elected official, it gets bigger, better, longer every year. There are units that are added, whereas which is why it takes longer, which is why it collapses that window to move the barricades from one side of the village to the other side of the village for the evening events. And I will also say that that is contradictory to what other municipalities are doing. They're shortening their parades because of these safety concerns and these capacity concerns. And talking to those elected officials, you know, we're in good company out of there. So I know that we like to be different and best and brightest for all those good reasons. But I am comfortable going with the 2024 route for all of the sessions, for all the reasons listed tonight. And I don't know where the $40,000 would come from. And I think to look for donations, which is sometimes something that comes up when we want to do something extra that's not a guaranteed service. Sometimes it's directed to look for donations, but we don't have a fundraising arm, and we also don't have the time. It's already mid-April, close to May. And so without a plan in place to secure those funds, I wouldn't be able to make that motion.
And to that point, if I may, one of the things that we're also looking at is the deadline for content for the Showa Today magazine. It just so happened that, you know, with the additional meetings that we had for it with great discussion, we're now at a place where we're going to be getting close to having that as well.
And that would be our opportunity. That's the most cost efficient opportunity to communicate with the entire.
What's the deadline for that?
I believe we're going to be first part of May. If I can talk, I know we have a placeholder for it, but there's already a graphic made. There's graphic made for both to that point though, both parade routes. But just wanted to let you all know.
I mean, communication wise, I'm not concerned about Shorewood today. I mean, it'd be great to get it in there, but I think we could.
Consideration.
It's a consideration. It's not one that,
Yeah,
in my mind,
I think
what I would like to do is I'll make a motion to defer to committee for 2 weeks until we can meet. And I'm happy to convene the committee earlier, see if we can't work with budget and finance to see if we could find the $40,000 and then move on this again. But for now, I'd like to defer it back. I'd move to defer it back to committee.
Second.
motion by trustee Kudo to defer. Well, actually, it would be to remand it back to committee. Defer would be just to, yeah.
Remand it back to meeting.
The second by trustee Ursink. Discussion.
Yeah, and I just want to say, I thank you, trustee Kudo, for your thoughts. I think they were really important thoughts and well put. I'm okay with this, with taking another 2 weeks to see if we can find the $40,000 somewhere. As I said, I think it is nice to include the entire, like to do that if possible. So I don't think 2 weeks is too much to ask in terms of trying to find that money. Stay with the traditional route. Most important for me is making sure that we remain consistent with best practices. So we obviously have to find the money. But again, I think it's reasonable to take 2 weeks, take another look at it and see if we can.
Question for, before trustee McGovern, question for staff. What would the process be to find that money?
It's simply not doing something that's already within the scope of your budget.
Mhm. And so what is the process that we go through to determine what that might be?
That's something that the committee will need to take a look at. I mean, when we have an approved budget, it's slated for different items that are to be worked on.
Yeah, I suspect this is something we'd have to talk to see Stokebrand about or with. I would imagine she would have to convene her committee.
Is it going to budget? I mean, is that in the?
Getting remanded to community and business relations, but in order to, I don't feel like we can proceed in the process without budget.
Can we do a community of a whole? I mean,
I don't have items proposed to reallocate. We've
Mm-hmm.
been working off of a proposal to move forward, so it's not, it's not doing something
Mhm.
that you've already identified. And I don't know, however you guys want to go about doing it, but I don't have a recommendation for you on
Okay.
where to take $40,000.
Okay.
And I'm not, I've never been a fan of kind of rewriting a budget, whether it be at budget time where people come in at the last minute and say, I want to take this out of the budget. You know, to me, it's kind of the same procedure. So I'm really at a loss of this is not a clean path forward. I
wonder-
understand it in concept, but I don't know. I think it's more than 2 weeks because whatever you came up with to propose to find, whatever you come up with to redirect funds from one budget item that's been approved to another, that needs to come to the village board.
maybe this is worth engaging the foundation about. I mean, it would be great to sit down with those folks and see if this is something that they're interested in talking about, and maybe they can come in as partners. Maybe they want to come in as the whole funder, but that's a possibility. And that's, I think, I think this is a big enough topic where we're missing 2 trustees tonight. It doesn't seem on the surface as a big topic, but obviously
Oh, it's a big topic.
it's a big topic, right?
I mean, if you're looking at the costs, right, and you're looking at the $40,000, roughly 3,000 of that would be recurring cost. Everything else would be purchased this one time, and that would be it. So, assuming that we don't have to continue to purchase new products down the road, but these are all purchase to, rental of a message board and private security to the tune of $2,800 and some odd dollars. So if we could find the $36,000 or $35,000, that's a one time, and then we're done with it.
As a note, that $35,000 would be roughly what the foundation already contributes, and this is the year that the fireworks actually escalates in contract. So they'll be giving good money, but just as a
Sure.
So
Yeah.
information.
procedurally, what's your proposal for how to engage the foundation? So they have an application process.
Right.
Typically, do we have board members meet with the foundation? I mean, I'm not against it, but I also don't want to put the board in a situation where we're going outside of protocol for something. So how would that happen?
I think we remand it to the committee and see which way we want to go with it. If the committee, I mean, do we want to go to the foundation? Do we take another look at it and say, you know what? This 40K just can't come from anywhere. It just is what it is, and it's unfortunate, but it is what it is. And in 2 weeks, we make the decision to go back to 23 or 24.
Mhm.
But the 2 weeks buys opportunity for additional conversation. And that's it. That's all it buys. That's the only guarantee you get.
Mhm. All right, Chief Worth.
So the prices that were quoted for the question and answer document prepared today were rental costs, not purchase costs.
Oh, they say it says purchase in the document.
They're rental costs. Right. Right. The questions posed by trustee Stokerbrand. So the prices that were quoted in the question and answer document
From today.
are rental costs.
Okay, I'd have to look at them
Okay.
simultaneously. I only have one screen here.
So, and so I'm not sure where the $40,000 is, but for the barricades, similar to what Waukesha purchased, those are rental costs.
Okay.
And I want to caution that the further that we get into, as we're now approaching May, there's no guarantee that we're going to get these barricades. So,
Understood.
And while I understand and sympathize with the South End residents' inability to potentially participate, there's capacity issues that remain.
Yes.
Just to jump on the participation effort, you may have seen in the memo that, and at the last community business relations meeting, working with Harbor Chase, which is now CL Senior Living, we've got their shuttle driver that's agreed to partner with us for the day. I've got additional calls going with TransDev as well, just to see what we can do so we can have multiple locations for shuttling folks to the parade as well as to the block party, the after party, I guess, as we can call it. So those conversations are still ongoing.
Okay, so with that, I would, yes, Attorney Bayer.
Thank you. As your attorney, I just want to make sure that everybody has the appropriate amount of information on the safety and security as that plays into the liability question. And I think as I read the analysis, the safety and security analysis from the police department, I read it to say that regardless of whether you had 40,000, an extra 40,000 or an extra 100,000 or an extra million, that the weak link in terms of safety and security was essentially crossing Capitol Drive because of the issues with not being able to shut that down entirely because of it being a through street or what, et cetera, which I've always noticed, at least in my participation in the parade, is that there's breaks in the parade where there's traffic going through there. And I just wanted to maybe pose that question to the police department. Is that, am I reading the analysis correctly, that regardless if you had an extra $1 million, the weak link from security and safety is essentially crossing Capitol?
It is a vulnerable point, yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Because that's, so, just take that into consideration as in your analysis is if we can't properly secure that crossing, and that leads to, God forbid, a traumatic, catastrophe where people's lives are, killed or injured, that's a concern, obviously. I mean, we've seen it in Waukesha, we've seen it in New Orleans, we've seen it in other places around the country. And I think that's ultimately what we're being told by our police department is that's kind of the Capitol Drive, crossing Capitol Drive is the main concern.
It is a predominant concern, yes. Even with the stopping the parade to allow traffic to cross, you'd have to have enough barricades and enough staff to facilitate properly crossing. And it remains vulnerable because somebody could, with some malintent, decide that they're going to make a north or south turn and enter the parade routes and cause harm or death. So we are heavily concerned about the crossing of Capitol.
Thank you for that reminder. I guess I held on these comments. I'm going to vote no. And I held on these comments because I didn't want to be seen as dramatic. But I will say the first summer that I was village president was the summer of the Highland Park shooting tragedy on July 4th. Getting that news, and that was a year when we had storms, and so our parade was canceled. And I was so relieved, and I literally felt sick to my stomach the rest of the day and several days after that. Since then, I have felt vulnerable in the parade. I'm not going to say I'm not saying we should change the route because of my, experiences. But I will say that having that perspective just changed me forever. And then talking to the mayor of Waukesha about our dilemma, just seeing him in 2025, the minute I brought it up, just kind of go pale. Again, I'm not saying that happens, but that's going to happen. But I am saying that I'm so thankful that we have staff that is professional and updating our practices so that we are in keeping with what should be expected in this day and age. And I am also comfortable taking the criticism of however our decision is perceived, and I will talk to any of those residents.
I could just say something.
Yes.
quickly. I'm gonna stick with my, my vote. I think that it's important, to me at least, to figure out what it looks like if we are indeed able to procure additional funding. All that said, I do share, the concerns about safety. It's not a guarantor of a vote one way or another when it comes back. And finally, I think that, given that this is such a high profile issue that we're discussing, I do think it's important to have the other two trustees here for this. So I'm going to stay with my vote to defer, but again, I share these concerns and I appreciate these concerns, but I'd like to see all options on the table before we make an impactful decision.
Thank you. So with that, okay. Trustee
I
Erling?
share Wesley's thoughts.
Well, at that point, I would just ask for, I think we should take a vote and call the question. So all those, the motion on the floor is to remand the item back to committee for further discussion and funding revenue, revenue to fund this request, and then bring it back to village board with a motion. So that would be, would you bring it back the same night?
Oh, yeah. Just,
Okay, so then the
just simply
soonest it
voting
would
to
come back
remand.
to village board would be the second meeting in May. Okay, so we have a motion by trustee Kudo, a second by trustee Ursink. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. Nay?
No.
No.
Nay.
Motion carries 3-2. All right, thank you for the discussion. 9B, consider award of contract for 2025 crack seal contract. So this comes to us, it's a pretty standard bid outcome, recommendation of the lowest bid. Is there a motion to approve the contract?
So moved.
Second?
Second. Wow. Wesley, you're first on the first motion back on the board. You're just going to still move it. You're not going to even read the whole thing.
I'm trying to
Come
scroll
on.
down
Yeah.
frantically. I'm sorry.
this is why you don't jump in like that, Wesley.
I'm rusty. I'm sorry. Oh, thanks.
You see it? It's really small. Sorry.
I move that a contract for the 2025 crack seal maintenance be awarded to Thunder Road in the amount of $21,654 and no cents.
Second.
All right, motion by trustee Warren, seconded by trustee Ursink. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. 9C, consider contractor for Atwater Bluff Native Landscape Management for Slope Stability Project. I know that trustee Ursink is ready to go on this.
I'm ready.
Okay.
So I move to approve the use of Merrick Landscaping to implement the Atwater Bluff Native Vegetation Restoration and Management for slope stability work intended to be primarily funded with an MMSD Green Solutions grant, and direct staff to negotiate final agreement based upon costs identified in the maintenance plan, estimated at $93,400 to $103,000.
Second.
Motion by trustee Ursink, seconded by trustee Kudo. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. That concludes new business for this evening. Moving on to item 10, report of village officials. Village president, there are two meetings with materials linked, the North Shore Fire Department board meeting and the ICC meeting from this month. I'd like to thank Manager Ewald for attending in my stead. We have two proclamations this evening. Do I have volunteers to, I did not.
Read one of them.
Arbor Day,
I'll read the Arbor Day.
Trustee McGovern, would you read Drinking Water Week?
Sure.
Okay, I'll let you guys kind of warm up on that, and I have a couple of quick announcements on my own. First of all, I'd like to, so standing committee assignments were sent out, so everybody should be aware of those. I wanted to commend staff on the annual report. That's an outstanding. I'm not, if you've done it before, I don't recall, but I think it's wonderful to take that step. This past week, I met with students from the Youth Rising Up group at the Shorewood High School to talk about their experiences in the committee off campus. And they raised some really, really good issues that I'm going to follow up on, and I'll report back. We already mentioned the bills being heard to support EMS expenditure restraint in Madison on the 23rd. And then finally, this past week, I had my annual meeting with Congresswoman Moore. And she said she's proud of Wisconsin for electing Susan Crawford to the Supreme Court race. I asked her how we can help her in DC, and she said to stay positive, stay active, and keep being Shorewood. And she also told us to spend our earmark that she gave us to, because the only safe money is spent money. So thank you. Oh, and she also reported that to look for creative ways to partner with the school district, that 3% of our school districts, the Shorewood School District budget comes from federal dollars, approximately $600,000 for the Department of Education, and then over between $100,000 and $200,000 for meal program from the Department of Agriculture. And so with those cuts happening, that's a 3% cut right there for the Shorewood School District, and she's very concerned about that. All right, with that, I would ask for reading of the proclamation of Arbor Day.
Fantastic. So, whereas the village of Shorewood enjoys the reputation of beautiful tree-lined streets and wooded parks, and whereas trees are important to our environment by reducing soil erosion, moderating temperature, cleaning the air, producing oxygen, and providing wildlife habitat, and whereas the residents of the village of Shorewood have demonstrated a significant interest in the conservation and preservation of rare and historic trees, and whereas trees are a renewable resource, giving us paper and wood for homes, fuel for fire, and countless other wood products. And whereas the village of Shorewood has been designated as a Tree City, USA by the National Arbor Day Foundation. Now, therefore, I, Ann McCulloch McCaig, President of the Village of Shorewood, do hereby proclaim Friday, April 25th, 2025 as Arbor Day in Shorewood, dated Shorewood, Wisconsin, this 21st day of April, 2025.
Thank you.
Good.
And thank you to DPW.
Is there any festivities for Arbor Day this year? Friday, where can we find those? Thank you.
Thank you.
River Park.
Okay. Hey,
Thank you.
Trustee McGovern.
All right. Whereas water is our most valuable natural resource, and whereas drinking water serves a vital role in daily life, serving an essential purpose to health, hydration, and hygiene needs for the quality of life our citizens enjoy, and whereas tap water delivers public health protection, fire protection, support for our economy, and the quality of life we enjoy, and whereas the hard work performed by the entire water sector, designing capital projects, operators ensuring the safety and quality of drinking water, or a member of a pipe crew maintaining the infrastructure communities rely on to transport high-quality drinking water from its source to consumers' taps. And whereas the coronavirus pandemic has shown a light on the importance of drinking water for health, hydration, and hygiene needs. And whereas we are all stewards of the water infrastructure upon which current and future generations depend. And whereas the citizens of our village are called upon to help protect our source waters from pollution, practice water conservation, and get involved with their water by familiarizing themselves with it. Now, therefore, I, Ann McCulloch McCaig, President of the Village of Shorewood, do hereby proclaim May 4th to May 10th, 2025 as Drinking Water Week in Shorewood.
Thank you very much. All right, at this time, I'd like to call for village trustees to share any reports they may have. All right, hearing none, village manager. All right, there are no future items of consideration. To Trustee Warren, we only take future items of consideration if they're posted. So in the future, we can instruct you how to submit those in advance. And now we have a closed session this evening. Is there a motion to go into closed session?
I move to adjourn into closed session pursuant to Wisconsin statute section 1985, subsection 1E, to deliberate or negotiate the purchasing of public properties where competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session to discuss prospective properties for the new DPW site.
Nailed it.
Second.
All right, motion by trustee Warren, seconded by trustee Kudo. This will be a roll call vote.
Trustee McGovern,
Aye.
President McKay,
Aye.
trustee Warren,
Aye.
trustee Kudo,
Yes, ma'am.
trustee Ursink.
Yes.
Motion carried 5-0.
All right, we are now in closed session at 8:47 PM.
And for anyone, no one is actually online. But for the record of this recording, I want to let you know that we'll be shutting down the Zoom and there'll be no further action taken other than reconvening and adjourning later this evening. Thank you.